So this is it. If this is your first video, my name is Vanessa, licensed therapist, mom coach, host of the Free to Be Mindful podcast, and a big fan of Sex in the City. I loved doing this tea and takeaways. And since the original series premiered in June of 1998, we've had nearly 3 decades with these characters. Characters who have shocked us, who we've all rooted for, and who we've had many opinions about across the spectrum, right? Good, bad, and the ugly. Characters haven't only changed a ton over the course of these almost 3 decades, but they've also changed a lot during the season of And Just Like That. And sure, the internet, meaning some of you all, by the way, had plenty to say about the writing this season. But honestly, I'm not the same version of myself when the show first premiered back in high school, and thank goodness for that. We all want to evolve throughout the course of time, just like they have. And many may look at this episode, or the entire series perhaps, as the relationships that we choose to have with others, whether they be platonic relationships, romantic relationships, but I truly believe that it really starts with the relationship that you have with yourself. So we'll be starting with each individual woman first, and then we'll get into the thick of things as we discuss the scene with the bridal fashion show, which I feel was a pivotal moment in the whole episode. And then we will go into the relationships. So let's get into the tea and into the takeaways, beginning with Charlotte. So Charlotte has always been the glue of her family, right? She's the biggest cheerleader for her friends. She doesn't always get it right, of course, but she's always there. And in this episode, she's exactly who we know her to be. She's cooking Thanksgiving and making the stuffy for Miranda's dinner that she promised. And then she takes care of Harry's sudden recovery and even has time to hand deliver the stuffing to Miranda's house. All while, of course, looking polished and thinking about setting Carrie up with somebody and managing her kids, also casual, right? And while there wasn't a ton of storyline for Charlotte in this finale, she does stay true to her character. She's a hopeless romantic, she's rooted in tradition, and she genuinely wants the best for her friends and for her family. The takeaway here is that Charlotte represents the truth that so many women live, being the glue that holds everyone together, even when no one's clapping for you. But here's the sticky part though. Trying to live like Charlotte all of the time just isn't possible. It's not realistic, and really it's not always healthy. Because yes, being reliable, loyal, committed, all of those things, it's admirable. But these same qualities need to be directed inward too. You can't keep pouring into everyone else, into a partner, into your kids, into your friends, without filling yourself back up first. And this is exactly the kind of reflection that we explore on my Free to Be Mindful podcast, which comes back at the start of September with season 7 on all podcast platforms, and yes, here on YouTube as well. Because the emotional labor of holding everyone together deserves to be met with just as much intentional rest and intentional joy. And again, not just for other people, but for yourself too. So if you see a little of yourself in Charlotte doing all the things and looking like you've got it all together when perhaps you really don't, just pause and ask yourself, are you showing yourself the same love and the same level of patience and follow through that you give everyone else? Because remember that the glue deserves care too. Now we're moving on to Seema. Seema may have joined the franchise a little late in the game, but she has absolutely earned her seat at the table. And in this finale, we see her come full circle, not back to who she was per se, but to a more grounded and self-assured version of herself. Her business is on the upswing, her confidence is back, and most importantly, she's asking herself some very real and very human questions. What do I actually want in this season of life? And we'll get into the relationship piece in a little bit, but what's powerful here is that Seema is asking herself who she wants and what she wants now through the present day eyes, not through the lens of who she was 10, 20, 30 years ago. She's not clinging on to a job title or a relationship status like some outdated definition of success. She's really evolving, she's changing, and she's doing it without losing her essence, her core. And what stood out most for her was that she didn't need to have this dramatic reinvention or a dramatic plot twist to make this happen. Instead, we really watched her recalibrate herself really intentionally, and that in and of itself was really, really powerful. So the takeaway here is that Seema reminds us that reinvention doesn't mean erasing who you are. What it does mean is making space for who you are becoming. You can still know yourself deeply and still be open for change. And that's the real growth, being able to pivot without losing your center, being able to question your wants without shaming your past, and being able to try something new without needing to prove it to anyone. For many women, especially midlife, this feels like the should era, right? You should settle down. You should know what you want. You should have kids. You should stick with what's stable. But Seema's storyline says otherwise, that we're allowed to shift. We're allowed to explore, to redefine what feels good, even now at this age. And maybe that's a lesson that we all needed to hear or need to hear for our future. Growth doesn't always have to be some loud or dramatic thing. It can mean quietly returning to yourself, just with perhaps some softer edges and stronger boundaries. And speaking of boundaries or lack thereof, this episode had me insanely laughing with all of the Thanksgiving chaos for Miranda. From the guest list getting chopped in half to the unexpected guests with a lot of personality showing up, to the bathroom chaos that we all dread. Has that ever happened to you? It's the most nerve-wracking feeling ever. What I really appreciated, though, was how grounded she felt throughout most of it. If we think back to the beginning of And Just Like That, Miranda was spinning, right? Trying on new versions of herself, chasing new experiences. She was really questioning everything in her life. And while some of it felt like it was whiplash at the time, it was definitely a lot. It was also real, because reinvention doesn't always look graceful. Sometimes it can be this messy, confusing thing. But here in the finale, it's like we finally got our Miranda back. Not the exact same Miranda from her lawyer or baby raising years, but a version of her who's still smart, who's still bold, sarcastically funny, just with a little bit more softness, let's say, and clarity. She's navigating these big transitions. I mean, hello, unexpected grandma status. And she's showing up for people in new ways, showing up for herself in a lot of new ways, even if she's still figuring it out in real time. The takeaway from Miranda is that this version of her reminds us that reinvention doesn't always have to mean transformation, right? Sometimes it's coming back to ourselves with more clarity and more intention. Because of course, life throws curveballs. And I mean, parenting adult children, not there yet, but I can see how it can still be a lot. And then you go through supporting your chosen family, managing messy holidays, like we saw. And we have to know that we don't have to have it all figured out. But if you stay open, if you stay self-aware, and if you trust your gut and your core, that's where the real growth happens. And it's okay to shift, right? It's okay to mess up, to come full circle. But maybe most importantly, it's okay to laugh through it all and have a good attitude. On a complete opposite side, Lisa has always brought us a kind of grounded, glamorous presence throughout the series. And in this episode, I feel like we got to see her in a new light. Because yes, she's a mother of school-age kids, just like Charlotte is. But I feel like Lisa's world is completely different. She's managing a high-power career and being married to someone who's constantly in the public eye, meaning that their family's then in the public eye. And she balances this all under the pressure of really being seen and how she's perceived at times, not just from outsiders, but from her family, specifically from her mother-in-law. And this season, having a work crush that could have easily turned into something more, it made her story a lot more layered and a lot more real at the same time. Because there were a lot of emotional gray areas, and these areas do exist, especially if you're spending long hours, let's say, on a project with someone who gets you creatively, who compliments you, who sees you in maybe ways that you haven't been seen in a while. And it doesn't help that he's not bad looking either, right? And then enter Marion, as we're talking about him, a coworker, a creative partner, and someone who clearly felt the vibe too. And I loved that we got to see, by the way, where the project was headed. I mean, the fact that Michelle Obama might narrate it, it's so amazing if this were a real thing. So when Lisa and Marion shared that excitement and they got up and hugged, I mean, that moment felt natural, right? Even the suggestion to grab a drink on the surface, very innocent and very natural for any coworkers to do. But I want to know what you think. Could they have gone out to celebrate and just left it at that? Lisa knew exactly where to draw the line. When she said, this has to be about work and we have to reel whatever this is back in, she memed what was happening in that moment. And that's something that many of us may hesitate to do in real life because it's not always easy, but she did. And she did it with honesty and with integrity. And she even followed it up with, can it be just about the work? Because it has to be just about the work. And Marion, who has never really said anything about anything, to his credit, he clearly understood. But when he said, I know enough not to put whatever this is into our movie, it did leave me wondering, like, what was it that he thought this actually was? It seemed to be a little nod to the fact that, yes, something was there. They definitely had this vibe going, but that it wasn't going anywhere. At least that's what I'd like to believe. Ultimately, though, Lisa didn't need her life to blow up or to go in an opposite direction. Yes, she definitely flirted with the idea, quite literally and figuratively, but she did this episode realign herself with what mattered most to her, which was her family. So for this takeaway, Lisa showed us something really powerful, that even in temptation, you can pause, you can breathe, you can reflect, and you can choose your values over your impulses. And it does need to be navigated with a lot of self-awareness, because flirting with the idea of something doesn't mean that you've done something wrong, but it's what you do next that counts. And she made a conscious choice to again realign with what mattered to her the most. And this is a beautiful reminder that boundaries aren't always just about saying no, but they are about saying yes to who you are, to what you value, and to the life that you actually want. And speaking of the life that we actually want, or the life that we're left with, let's explore Carrie. And let's take a look at her as a friend first before we dive into the romance part. So earlier this series, I shared that I thought that Carrie was actually being a good friend. And let's just say that the comment section strongly disagreed and came with the receipts. And I heard you loud and clear. You weren't wrong. But that's the beauty of watching characters grow over the course of 27 years. We get to see the mess and the maturity. And in this finale, Carrie showed us glimpses of both. Yes, she had the tense moment with Miranda earlier on in the season, but she came back from it. And though we never saw an apology happen per se, she did have enough self-awareness to admit that she was wrong, and she made room for accountability. And that does show some growth. So in this episode, we saw her step up in some small and quiet ways, or maybe there were big ways for Carrie, who knows? But we know that she doesn't cook. So the fact that she was left to take care of a turkey for Thanksgiving was a big deal. And even before that, she doesn't show up to people's houses empty-handed. So instead, she ordered every pie for everyone. She delivered them herself, and she let the cab meter run while she was going in and out of places the whole time. Now, in New York City, letting the cab meter run, big deal. It's major. And so on top of that, she also encouraged Miranda not to spiral and to actually call Joy to see what was happening. She gently called out Charlotte with the matchmaking thing with Mark. Without shaming her, though, she was kind about it. She asked Adam about Seema, not trying to pry, but really with care and intent. And even her sweet relationship with Brady, who does call her Aunt Carrie, even though she's his godmother, if you remember from way back then. He asked her to take care of the oven, and did we ever think that we'd see the day her taking something that was not sweaters out of the oven? And does she always get it right? No, but honestly, if we think about it, do any of us? I don't. Watching Carrie this season reminded me how easy it is to critique other people, right? When we have a bird's eye view, it's really easy to have a whole lot of opinions. But in real life, we only see situations from our side, and we don't always realize the impact that we have on other people. And this perspective shift really does matter. And when Carrie told Adam, that she wanted her garden to be more wild and free, it instantly took me back to the movie Encanto, and it made me think of Isabela. You know, the moment when she stops blooming these perfect flowers and she starts growing more bold, colorful vines. It seems like that's Carrie now. She's not trying to live up to this neat version of herself. It seems like she's finally choosing to be her fully and freely. And the takeaway here is that Carrie reminds us that growth doesn't always look like reinvention. Sometimes it's quietly unfolding, and sometimes it shows up through the times where we may care a little bit more, where we may have a little more self-awareness, and when we don't perform, when we just are. And even if people still see you through the lens how you used to be, my friends, it's you who gets to decide who you are today, who you are right now. So if you've ever felt stuck in a version of yourself that maybe no longer fits, take it from Carrie. It's never too late to be a little bit more wild, to live a little bit more freely, and to be a lot more like you. So that was them individually, but then it got deep. When we had the scene with the bridal runway, visually, by the way, it was giving full-on Sex and the City nostalgia, the drama, the gowns, the runway moments. But emotionally, for me, this was a true center of this episode, and in my opinion, even of the whole series. Because we see the audience being filled with families, a whole lot of young girls, all staring in awe at these gorgeous wedding dresses. And that alone reflects how deeply ingrained that idea of happily ever after, that narrative, how it's embedded in all of us. And it's something that I talked about last week. And it reflects how, from the time it seems like we're all in diapers, how fairy tales, Disney movies, commercials, and conversations with family, it all teaches us that we have to believe in this idea of being chosen by a man and how that is the ultimate goal. It's never said so bluntly, but if you really dig, that is the messaging that we receive, and that it's only through being chosen by the man that we arrive to our happily ever after. And it's only in recent years in Disney movies that characters like Moana or Elsa, that we've seen a shift in this whole storyline. So watching these four women, all in different stages in life, all with very different relationship statuses, all reflecting on this narrative, to me, it was really powerful, starting with Seema. She was especially raw and real because she says, I think I'm in love with a man who will never get married. Do I have to get married, or do I think I just have to? I've been groomed for this, the ceremony, the romance. Do I really want it, or am I just programmed for it? And she wasn't just talking about her relationship. She was really talking about all of us, about the cultural conditioning that pushes women to view marriage as the end goal. And if you remember early in the series, Seema referenced how her Indian heritage emphasized marriage, which added more pressure to kind of check this box off. And then her moment with Carrie, when Carrie shares, I wanted to get married because it meant that I was chosen, Seema responded with, well, do I feel chosen by Adam? Is that even his responsibility? And I mean, that whole exchange unpacked was so much about how women internalize value and worth through the lens of relationships. And right next to them, we have the two married women, right? Charlotte and Lisa. And they're knee deep into their own conversation. And it was really interesting when Lisa says, someone needs to tell all these sweet, unsuspecting girls that marriage is way more than the gorgeous dress. And it immediately brought me back to Sex and the City, the movie, when Big doesn't show up for their wedding. Horrible move, totally unforgivable in real life, but through a therapist lens, I get it. His whole thing, it wasn't about lack of love. It was about the feeling of overwhelm by the performance of it all. So then we hear Charlotte chime in and say, marriage is also about the cancer. Don't forget about the cancer. And obviously that's what she's been navigating, showing up for Harry, not just in good times, but in the hard ones too. And Lisa follows up with, is it ever about us? It's always about their feelings, their disappointments, what to say and what not to say. And that line hit hard because it really is so often true. We as women carry these emotional labor in relationships, whether we know it or not, or whether we say it out loud or not. And it seems like a lot of us are constantly editing ourselves to either keep the peace or to continue to check off these boxes that we've set up for ourselves. And what I hope that we all pick up on, especially women in their early 20s that may be watching this, is that Seema's narrative isn't just relevant to when you're single. Even when you're married, the questions, the reflections, the emotional weight, these things don't stop. Having these conversations isn't just necessary, it's about being real with people you trust. And it's important for women to have conversations like this so that they know that they're not alone, because the Disney version of love isn't the real version that we very often experience. So the takeaway here is when Charlotte's line said, "It's not about me right now," it may have sounded really simple, but it does carry a lot of weight, because marriage or any long-term relationship, it isn't always this 50-50 split. It reminds me when I got married almost 15 years ago, we had to take this pre-Cana class, and I'll never forget the priest saying, marriage is never 50-50, right? It's a fake out when people say that. Sometimes it's 60-40, sometimes it's 30-70. It really does shift depending on what it is that life throws at you and what stage of life you're in. And we did see that come up for Charlotte in this entire season. And then later on, when Lisa asked, if you knew then what you know now, would you still get married? And despite just having unloaded some heavy feelings, she and Charlotte both said yes. And I'll tell you, I would too. Because being in a committed relationship, being married, being a mom, yeah, it's a ton of work. The fantasy doesn't always come matching this reality that is what's in front of us. But through the ups and the downs, it's all normal. So when we think about it, this entire bridal runway scene, it does raise a much deeper question though. Are we choosing marriage and partnership because we genuinely want it, or because we were raised to need it? And I know that sounds very heavy. And when someone chooses to be alone, not out of defeat, but really out of intention, how do we respond? Because if we're being honest, it's often with a little bit of pity and maybe a little bit of judgment, because it challenges everything that we've been taught about the feeling of being fulfilled. So the question here is, why aren't we teaching our kids, especially our girls, that choosing themselves is just as valid, that they can be whole without the ring and the dress, without the "I was chosen" storyline? And that if they do choose partnership, which is okay, of course, we also need to teach them how to hold on to their own joy and their own fulfillment and their own well-being, not at the expense of their families, but for the sake of showing up more present for their families. We have to work on shifting this narrative, of shifting this storyline. I hope that we can all get to a point where we can tell our daughters and even our inner little girls that choosing yourself isn't selfish, and it really is enough. And that's the beautiful part of life, is that even without a manual, we're really all just doing our best, right? We're trying to figure it out as we go. And the hope is that through it all, that we all are learning, that we're all growing, becoming better versions of ourselves, and not just for ourselves, but also for the people we love. And so we do see some glimpses of growth in all of the relationships on this show. Let's take Lisa and Herbert, for example. When Lisa walks in after obviously an emotionally layered day, it was really sweet how she just grabbed Herbert's hand and started reciting vows, not the vows that we typically hear, but she says, "I take you in Tom Ford suits or in sweatsuits till death do us part." It was a moment of real love and real understanding. And when Herbert says, "I'll get over it," Lisa gently corrects him and says, "No, we'll get over this." She reminds him that it's a partnership, that it's not just working through conflicts, but it's really remembering that the two of you are a team. And then at the very end, we see it returned when Herbert tells Lisa, "Go sit down, I've got this mess." And that really speaks volumes too. Because when you prioritize your needs and show up fully for yourself, then the people around you begin to follow your lead. And another relationship that we see getting there is Seema and Adam. Now, of course, this relationship caught us a little off guard. We weren't expecting it, but there's something that was really refreshing about the two of them. Seema shared that Adam sees her maybe more clearly than any man ever has. The way he told Carrie, she's not just a Thursday, she's special, she's a lifetime. That line really showed how committed he was. While Seema spent so much of her adult life being independent, self-sufficient, and fabulous, she also spent so much, to the point of too much time, being guarded. And we've talked about how that armor, it does take a while to be able to put down. But she was still open enough to give something an actual chance. And Adam was very patient, more patient than maybe a man in real life would be. But he wasn't a pushover, if you notice. He gave her space, but he still made his intentions very clear. And that balance of being true to yourself while also making space for someone else, that is really everything in a healthy relationship. And then the last scene where she's wearing jeans and saying, well, when in Rome, because she was going to see Adam's family. That's not just a change of style, because I don't think we've ever seen Seema in jeans, but it's a woman choosing really to be more flexible, a little less guarded, while still holding on to who she is. So, question for you. Do you think that Seema and Adam are actually going to work this out? Do you think that they may be something long term if there was a next season? Moving on to Miranda and Steve. It was really nice to see the two of them in a place where they could laugh, bust each other's chops, and still show up for Brady. I'm glad that they can both sit and have a good laugh about it and be together to just figure things out. Well, we've talked about this before. Even though Miranda and Steve are no longer a couple, they're still a team, and they're navigating this new chapter of soon-to-be grandparents, which is still wild to say. And it was sweet when Steve said, there's no way that this grandkid of ours isn't going to know us. Even hearing him say our grandkid, it showed that after heartbreak, after separation, after years apart, that they're still united when it really does matter. And when he asked, oh, well, is she pretty? Then Miranda was like, why would you ask that? I didn't see it as a big deal. It's kind of like a normal reaction for anybody to ask, but especially a dad. So what do we think? What type of grandparents are Miranda and Steve going to be? And are they actually going to be involved in this baby's life? And the second relationship here is Miranda and Joy. They're still figuring it out. And this episode kind of gave us a little glimpse as to what growth looks like in real time. When Miranda started spiraling about Joy's dog suddenly being sick, it was nice that Carrie gave her the nudge of, before you air quote her out of the relationship, just call her, right? Pick up the phone and talk to her. And it was exactly what Miranda needed to hear. And it is always refreshing to see Carrie not feed into the drama, but instead holds Miranda accountable. And to Miranda's credit, she followed through, right? Even a few episodes ago, she might have assumed the worst, or she might have avoided the hard conversation. But this time she chose to lean into it and actually show up for someone else's needs, not just her own. So when she shows up at the vet and Joy told her what happened, the dog ate a small Lego piece. It was really interesting when she said, this is why I'm not a fan of children. And meanwhile, Miranda's about to start this new chapter as a grandmother. I just think it's a huge identity shift for both of them. And it kind of begs the question, will Joy be open to Miranda's evolving family life? Because it's one thing to fall in love with somebody when they are as they are. But what happens when things begin to change? Can we stretch and grow with them, even when it seems a little bit unexpected or when it's taking us in unexpected directions? Of course, this isn't about being perfect and being aligned to everything in a perfect way, but it's about them showing up through the awkwardness, through the missteps, through shit on the floor, literally, and everything in between. And a surprise relationship that I want to bring up is Brady and Mia. And yes, we've only seen them act together only in this one episode. But what we do see is hints of them being open to potentially even being on speaking terms at the very least. So when we start with Mia, the girl is clearly talking smack before her and her friends got there. But to Mia's credit, she did kind of try to keep it together when she got to Miranda's house and she was respectful. But her friends, on the other hand, completely different story. I mean, from Mia's ripped pantyhose to the unsolicited solo dance party to the blowing up the bathroom, the whole thing felt like a TikTok video gone wrong. It was just like hotmess.com. But here's the thing. There was a glimmer of something familiar. It really was so reminiscent of Miranda and Steve. If we paid attention, when Mia casually mentioned, oh, I only eat like seaweed and brown rice or something like that, Brady, without anyone asking him to, on Thanksgiving Day, when he was the chef for Thanksgiving dinner, went out and went to go find her the seaweed or whatever it was that she was eating. It's such a small gesture, but it was really meaningful because it showed that he did care and that he did have consideration for Mia. So at that point, he wasn't even this young boy. He was, a young man about to become a dad and trying to just figure it out. So, question for you. Do you think that Brady and Mia have what it takes to actually make this work, to at least co-parent together and to have the grandparent in this child's life? Something that we're going to be left wondering about. And then moving on to Charlotte and Harry, where they're giving a whole lot of thanks. That line in the delivery by Harry as he and Charlotte race to the bedroom to take advantage of the situation that came up, pun intended. It made me really laugh out loud. And Lily casually commenting, "Oh, mom's busy in the bedroom." When Carrie came by to drop off the pies, I couldn't help but laugh because it was a classic moment where parents don't really name things, but obviously our kids know a lot more than we think or a lot more than we state. But pulling back the curtain to what was actually happening in that moment, after struggling the entire season with this diagnosis and with going through some really heavy emotions, Harry finally gets it together. And Charlotte at that moment stops everything. I mean, she's literally in the middle of Thanksgiving dinner, stops and goes to take care of business. And she doesn't do it in this comedic, flustered, over the top kind of way, or not even in an embarrassing type of way. She really is there for her husband. And in that moment, as funny as it was, it says a lot about the kind of partner that Charlotte is, which we already know. Because we often joke that Charlotte is prim and proper and the one obsessed with appearances. And, she's all about being the perfect mom. But what we really see is a woman who is fiercely loyal and really emotionally attuned and committed to her husband, to her marriage. And she has that same intensity for her kids as well. So again, Charlotte reminded us that long-term relationships require patience, require care, and sometimes a shift in priority, even in the middle of cooking dinner. But when both partners are putting in this work, even when it's awkward, delayed, or unexpected, that's when real intimacy happens. And it's something to remember as we grow older with our partners. And now let's talk about the relationship that calls for a table for one. And that's the relationship of Carrie with being comfortable with herself. So her sitting at that lunch, it wasn't just this visual, but it was an actual shift, because last episode, we really saw her unsettled and uncertain. And this episode actually felt really different. It didn't seem sad and she didn't seem lost. She was just Carrie. And sure, did she struggle with the order? Did she not know what she wanted? I mean, Carrie's flighty, right? That always happens. But it seemed like she was finally okay with being alone until society told her otherwise and brought along that doll, Tommy Tomato. Who thinks of these things? It was absolutely ridiculous. But the fact that we've created devices and dolls so that people don't have to be alone, it really says a lot about the way society has pathologized solitude, especially when it comes to women. And truthfully, I think I said it in an earlier episode, there is power behind going to a movie by yourself, going to eat dinner by yourself. There's something freeing about it, just to sit with you and your thoughts without any distractions or without any pressure to perform. And that's not loneliness, that's just you being present for yourself, or at least it should be. But obviously, Carrie's still grappling with this a little bit, because she did put a lot of thought behind the statement, "I may be alone for the rest of my life. Who will I be alone?" And even after Big died, she held on to the maybe Aiden, which I don't even want to mention his name, but I get it. And then now she held on to the maybe Duncan. And there are plenty of people who say, "Carrie, just get over it. What's your problem?" But if we zoom out for a second, let's really think about this 60-something-year-old woman who was raised with the idea that you need someone and you need a man to define you, that you're not whole all by yourself. And it may sound wild to say in 2025, but really it wasn't all that long ago that women couldn't even open up a bank account or buy a house without a man or without their dad. But despite this, she's come to accept it, even though obviously we've seen that it's really hard for her. When she got back to her house, walking into this big house all by herself, did she feel emptiness? Did she feel lost? Or was there some acceptance finally, maybe quiet relief, not having to deal with all of the mess that Miranda was dealing with and just being by herself? She seemed to be comfortable there. When she was singing without a care in the world, when she was eating pie straight out the box, which I don't think I've ever done that. I'd like to try it one day. And when we see her dancing in the hallways, she wasn't performing, she wasn't waiting, she was simply living. And was that enough for her? Can it be enough for her? It seems like when she sat down to write the epilogue, thank goodness she rewrote it. When she wrote, the woman realized she wasn't alone. She was on her own. It really hit deep. But when you're in a big house or in a big bed alone on your own, can you hold on to that truth with the same conviction? And in this moment, at least, Carrie did. So we see the final scenes of the episode highlight all the relationships, the romantic, platonic, messy, evolving. All of these connections show up in such a different way for each of them. Anthony and Giuseppe were cracking up, being honest, finally letting each other in with pie on the face. Charlotte managing her teens' big feelings, holding space for change and still believing in fairy tales because of course she does. That's her ideal. Lisa carrying so much this season and finally being told to sit down and just put her feet up. Seema still independent, but being flexible enough to give new things a try, spending Thanksgiving surrounded by a family that she'd never planned for and was not her ideal, but somehow it's her reality and she's seeming to enjoy it. And then Miranda and Joy eating pie together, a moment that wasn't perfect, but was still true for them. And then Carrie eating pie all by herself. Not sad, not broken, but just on her own. So while perhaps some of us were wondering, well, who's she going to end up with? Maybe the real question is, why do we assume that she has to end up with anyone at all? And sure, we were used to for so many years, we were used to Sex in the City. But this series wasn't about the hookups or the high heels, although of course the fashion was fantastic. This was really about learning to love yourself. So whether you're partnered, divorced, widowed, single, whether you're child-free or you have a house full of kids, no matter what your label or lack thereof, the real journey is really coming back to you. And the truth that we don't often hear said out loud is that even if you do the self-love work, there really is no guarantee that having a partner or kids will help you feel fulfilled. Just like there is no guarantee that someone will come along. So I hope that we can all release this pressure to live by someone else's story, that we can all stop measuring ourselves by these outdated ideals and let our lives expand beyond these categories or beyond these boxes that we've perhaps outgrown. My friends, it was such a pleasure to spend the last 12 weeks with you doing tea and takeaways. In the polls, you've let me know that you'd like Ginny and Georgia to be next. So that is exactly what's coming to you next Friday. And please leave in the comments if you have suggestions for future series to go through. I do invite you all to listen to the Free to Be Mindful podcast, which is being premiered on September 1st. And if I can ever help you through therapy, if you're a New Jersey resident, or through mom coaching, if you want to come back to yourself, I invite you to visit me on this channel or at freetobemindful.com.